1 out of every 5 head of fat cattle processed is beef on dairy influenced. 20%. When you think of beef on dairy, you would maybe want to say 3 to 4, maybe 5%. No, it's 20%. Do you ever think that the days in which we're at 30 million head of domestic beef cattle will ever come back? No, they won't. The cattle inventory report has been so clear that whenever we have ebbs and flows in the marketplace, whenever we're, liquidating or beginning to build back, we never build back to the level in which the market was before.
Well, that's DTN Livestock Market Analyst ShayLe Stewart, and we have quite the conversation with her coming up this week on Next Year Country as we dive into the recent announcements from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, reopening the southern border to cattle imports, the cattle on feed report, the biannual cattle inventory report. A lot of great conversation coming up on this episode of Next Year Country. Of course, we'd like to thank BNSF Railway for providing today's episode. Since 1854, BNSF has partnered with farmers to make sure wholesome grain makes its way from America's heartland to dinner tables around the globe. BNSF is wishing producers a safe and successful 2026 harvest season. Thanks for joining us once again on the Next Year Country podcast. I'm Colton Young, joined by my fellow broadcasters. I didn't even come up with a name for you guys this episode. Andy Schwab and Coulter Brown. Thanks for coming on here again this week. And Coulter, you've been hitting the road early this week already. Went to Red Lodge.
Yeah, Montana Feed Association. That's actually the third year in a row that I've been able to speak at their summer meeting. So they are scraping the bottom of the barrel for speakers, but glad to be able to come back and talk about where these markets are, how they tie into global markets for sure, and just see some of the optimism out there from these guys that work with producers across the region, and boy, things are looking good. Most everybody has good things to say, even if the moisture is not quite where they want it at this time of year. It's hard not to be excited about this market, and of course the opportunities that using the right nutrition program can create to really capitalize on a record high market.
Absolutely. And as we're kind of approaching the end of summertime, we know the county fair season's been in full swing. Andy, I know you made it over, I think, Wheatland County, where you were last weekend, helping rattle the tongue a little bit at some county fairs.
Yeah, that was fun. My microphone actually cut out. Well, the speaker itself cut out halfway through the auction. So I was yelling the prices to the people, and I felt bad for them. But we got through it. The speaker started working when they found the charge cord again, and nice. Things were going well. Of course, the week before I was in my hometown of Powell for the junior livestock sale there as well. It's just been a busy one. You've been on the road, too, a little bit. What are you seeing? I know Powell, I think the averages were down, but the dollars were up because of the head counts in Powell. I think steers were averaging close to $6 a pound, and hogs were $9 a pound. Lambs were $14 a pound in Powell. It was good. It was record-setting for them. What have you been seeing?
Yeah, it definitely was a record-setting year at Stillwater County. Of course, our family did that one and did Carbon County the week after. And I think we popped off a lamb at $27 a pound, which was exciting to see. I go back and forth on the steer prices because I would say our steers average close to $5 a pound. But you look at what the price of ground beef is right now, that kind of seems like a pretty good deal for a 4-H steer. I know it's still a lot of money up front, but we were selling hogs over $9 left and right in both Stillwater and Carbon, and even sold some rabbits and chickens for $1,000 in Carbon County.
That's good money right there.
Always exciting to see.
The rabbits. Did you sell any turkeys?
Nope, no turkeys, just
sold
rabbits.
A turkey this year.
Nah. Do you take that to processing? What do you?
They said he can keep it, and the parents are like, "Oh, are you
That's
serious?"
every year with the chickens and rabbits, and I'm always waiting for that one guy to buy it and say, "I'll take it to Pioneer."
Yes, exactly.
Well, like we said, we have ShayLe Stewart, livestock market analyst, on our episode today to dive into all things cattle. But it has been a very busy summer as far as ag headlines. What's been going on around the ag industry? Andy, we'll kick it to you for this week's headlines.
Yeah, a bunch of big news coming out over the weekend. But first, we do have to say thanks to our sponsor, Western Ranch Supply here in Montana. Is, of course, Montana-owned and operated, proudly serving farmers and ranchers with quality products and trusted expertise for over 70 years. Trusted by generations because we are built by generations. I think probably the big news headline that we saw come out over the weekend was U.S. Senator John Boozman, of course, the Senate Ag Committee chairman also. He released the revised Farm Bill 2.0 text and getting ready for that markup this week. So big news on that front. I know before that came out, they were talking about maybe the word MCOOL being in their mandatory country of origin labeling in the Farm Bill. Did not see that in the Farm Bill text for the Senate side. One thing, though, that we did see inside there was the year-round sales of E15 gasoline. So a big win for those, those ethanol producers in the Midwest. And that was something they were really pushing for. Probably some of the bigger things in that Farm Bill, too. They were looking to strengthen the farm safety net programs. The conservation natural resources were going to get kind of a even keel look at it. And they're also going to increase some of the trade and marketing, the FMD and the foreign market development programs and the market access programs, which in my opinion, I don't know about you guys, but in my opinion, I would love to see a lot of those dollars go towards that. And I think a lot of these producers out there, they're not looking to go to the mailbox to make sure their ends are meeting. They're looking to sell their product at a good level. And I think that foreign market development program and the market access program are some things that I would love to see the USDA look at and really put forward an effort to try and get that boosted a little bit more.
Well, I haven't seen any pushback on this Farm Bill. Everybody keeps saying it's cool. It seems awesome. I don't know what this cool thing is they keep throwing around.
Well, Andy, you talked about MCOOL not being in the text. Senator John Thune introduced it as an amendment to the Farm Bill. So the cool conversation isn't done yet. But really the thing that surprises me is the tone of bipartisanship from Chairman Bozeman on this. There's no way it gets through the Senate without Democrat support. You have to be able to have a bipartisan farm bill. So they've kind of calmed on the cuts to SNAP, pushing those back to try to get Democrats to lean in and pass this bill. So it seems possible to me that we actually could get a farm bill done here in 2026. We'll probably see it expire again, though, at the end of September before anything happens.
No kidding. But, of course, one of the things that was with that as well, when we talked about the working across the aisles, the Democrats, there really were, the focus was on that Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP as we all know it as. But the big thing there was the fact that that Democrats, there were so many error payments out there. There was so much money going out to these individuals that were big time errors, and a lot of these, the Democratic states were okay with it. I mean, they were like, "Oh, it's helping those families out," and yeah, it was, but it's not what they were supposed to be receiving. And so that was kind of the compromise between Republican Senator John Bozeman and some of the Democrats, is that he was going to give them a little bit further time to get this corrected. But if they don't get it corrected, I think he said they had to pay back like 20% of it, or I'd have to dig in a little bit deeper on that. But that was the caveat there, that they got an extension on fixing some of these error payments going out to the SNAP recipients. So,
well, I know there was big concern for getting Farm Bill text, the markup, of course, that's going to be happening this week, and just getting it before we see a recess for the end of the summer run. So definitely, I think there's a lot of progress being made before we see a break in action in D.C.
Most certainly. Well, another big news story that also broke over the weekend was the USDA confirming a detection of Classical Scrapie in a slaughter sheep in Oregon. Now, the big news here, I spoke with American Sheep Industry Association President Ben Lefeld about this, but he said the good thing here is the fact that it's a one-off case. Sounds kind of like a small flock, and the problem, though, is that it was not identified. They didn't have the scrapie ear tag, so it made that traceability part just a little bit more difficult, but they were able to track it back and find out that, okay, it's just a small flock. It's not a big concern right now. The biggest concern is because there's going to be an investigation. After this investigation, the World Organization on Animal Health is going to look at this too, and because America is on track to becoming self-identify as scrapie-free by 2028. So that's the big question. Are they going to be able to continue calling themselves scrapie-free? Because this is, I think, 5 years since they've had
since
a
2021
case.
Was the last confirmed case.
So this is certainly a huge thing for the sheep producers. Just comes, Coulter, right at the time when these sheep producers are getting some of the best dollars they've been receiving. But I think Ben said it best, that we're not going to see, likely not going to see a big impact on the export markets as well.
Yeah, I think this is just a blip on the radar. I'm hoping that is the case, because you're right. It's probably the best lamb market we've ever seen, up 50 to 80% from a year ago on the feeder lamb selling right now. So a lot of optimism in the sheep business. I mean, certainly concerning to have something like this pop up for the first time in 5 years. And boy, underscores the importance of why we put those scrapie tags in. And I don't know, you guys can unpack a can of worms and talk about how these are metal scrapie tags, right? They are not EID tags.
Exactly.
And yet somehow they work. Shocking.
Where's that speculate wildly music coming? Well, that was, I think, the most surprising part of the announcement that stood out to me was that the identified lamb didn't have a tag. I didn't know that we were okay with that.
Yeah, that was interesting to see to me too. So probably didn't sell through a market, so it probably was going right directly to the slaughterhouse. So that's how it's supposed to work, though. As Ben mentioned, you can hear that conversation on our website, northernag.net. We've aired Ben's comments quite a bit on that. So good on the American Sheep Industry Association to work directly with the USDA. That's a busy department with the talks of the border reopening, and now for the cattle coming from Mexico, and now this, and boy, that is just
screwworm and scrapie.
Earning their
year
keep, I hope.
Yeah.
Screwworm and scrapie year.
Well, I think now we're going to hear from ShayLe Stewart, livestock market analyst. Honestly, one of the best interviews we've done here on Next Year Country, so definitely stay tuned for that. But first, a thank you to Nutrilix, the total livestock supplement. Nutrilix liquid supplement specifically formulated to provide the nutrients cattle need to make good health and provide a returnable income on your investment, especially in these tough drought conditions like we've seen in a lot of the country for quite a while now. It's easier and cheaper to supplement grass now than it is to feed hay later.
Well, we have a very exciting guest joining us here this week on our Next Year Country podcast. We're joined now with a marketing specialist for Big Country Genetics and, of course, analyst for DTN, ShayLe Stewart. ShayLe, we're excited to have you on. Thanks for joining us here. How are things going in Wyoming?
Really, Colton, like everywhere else, it's been a fast and furious summer. We've had a plethora of things thrown at us, whether that's drought or, right now we're just lucky in dealing with smoke. We're not personally dealing with any fires, but it's been a long summer. It's been a good summer, but there's been a lot of headwinds and there's been a lot of curveballs that we've had to, as individuals and participants in the market, deal with. So I'm excited for the opportunity to chat with you guys this afternoon. And thank you for your platform here. You're doing phenomenal work.
Absolutely. And before we dive into the topic, I had to congratulate you because I saw the other weekend at the Matiti Ranch Rodeo, you won the Top Cowgirl Award. That looked like it was a fun time. The team did pretty well out there.
I'm just so thankful for the opportunity to have a weekend to go do something and kind of, show up and have a good time, because I'm pretty sure my kids are just going to remember me as somebody who did dishes their whole childhood. And so it was fun to have an opportunity to go have a good time. So yes, it was great.
Well, it sure looked like it was a fun time and glad to see that. And, we're just going to dive right in, ShayLe. There's so much noise, I feel like, in the recent state of the cattle market, and we could go a million directions with this and talk about so many different topics. But let's start out with some of the recent announcements and decisions that we've seen that did bring a little bit of pressure on the board. Of course, this week we have seen a bounce back, which has been much needed, I think, and it's been quite evident in some of the auctions and video sales that we've been watching. But just 2 weeks ago, we saw the announcement from the U.S. Department of Agriculture about their phased reopening of the U.S. southern border to Mexican cattle imports starting here at the end of the month. Was that announcement first off a surprise to you? Is that something you had kind of seen coming down the pipeline? I know they had talked about once we get this handled, we were going to start phasing, but it seemed awful fast from when we saw the first screwworm detection. And then I think there was 12 cases in 18. And then just a month later, we're already planning on reopening the border.
Yeah, good point. And so I wish that I had the insight, the crystal ball, the intel to the Ag Secretary to be able to say, I knew that was coming and all of our customers were abreast on the matter. But I didn't. That Friday really hit like a Mack truck. We had the July cattle on feed report. We had the biannual cattle inventory report. And then it was 8 p.m. Eastern time, so 6 p.m. our time, that we got the announcement that they were going to start to in a phased manner, reopen the border. And I will say that although it was a lot to absorb in one day, I am very grateful for how the Ag Secretary went about handling it. I'm very appreciative that she shared the report's release, or her announcement, I should say, at that time of the day, because what that did, it did a couple things for the market. Number one, we were able to get through the day's trade without any added volatility. Number two, we were able to absorb the cattle on feed report, cattle inventory report, and get those behind us before we worried about this new announcement. And then thirdly, I know that some people were frustrated that it happened at all, which I can understand. It's like, what has changed in the marketplace? We still have some confirmed cases of New World screwworm in the United States. And here we are, it's the middle of August. I don't understand. Like if we had had our first frost, our first freeze, maybe I'd understand. But needless to say, this is not a unilateral talking point or subject that we can look at. It's so multifaceted. And so I actually am grateful that she shared it when she did, if it was going to happen, because it allowed individuals to absorb that news for 2 whole days, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, before Monday when the market opened. And it was limit lower in some of the feeder cattle contracts, but we at least had 2 days to digest it before the market opened on Monday. And then Monday was lower, and then boom, Tuesday hit, and you would have never expected, never realized that anything happened on the following Friday or Monday if you didn't know about it. The market basically absorbed it and then ran off.
And really, since then, ShayLe, I mean, we've gained all that money back and then some, almost straight up since that announcement came out. So as we think about what is life going to look like with that border open again, it's a lot of questions, obviously, I think. And I'm curious for your perspective on how many head are we talking that are come to our market? What type of cattle are they going to be? Are they 7 weights? Are they going to be, harvest ready cattle? What are you hearing about what we can expect over the next 4 months as we have this phase reopening of the ports?
So those might be the most important questions and the questions that everybody is asking. And so I've done some digging because that's what's on everybody's mind, right? And while I don't know exactly, the port's not reopened and it's all just hearsay until we see those first hoof prints cross the border, this is what I can tell you. I've spoken with an individual who is a good man. He's a trusted man. He works with the Ag Secretary on a weekly basis. And he told me, ShayLe, this is the plan moving forward. I can't tell you the exact weights, but I expect about 2/3 of the cattle that are going to be phased into the process. 2/3 of them are likely going to be feeder cattle. 1/3 of them is going to be fat cattle. And when we say fat cattle, remember, when we are importing cattle from Mexico, what is that beef for? It's for ground beef. And so we're going to have more of that lean beef available to our marketplace, which is really what we've been missing. We've already culled so many of our old coal cows. We don't really have a whole lot supporting the ground beef sector. I mean, so much to the point that we've seen, I think the last time I calculated it, it was roughly 15 days thus far this year where select prices have closed higher than choice because packers are pulling select meats and opting to grind them as opposed to just let them be cuts because they are short on lean beef. So, Americans eat roughly 13 million metric tons of beef a year, 11 of which of those million metric tons are raised, and anywhere between 2 to 3 million metric tons are imported. So when we take into consideration that they're expected to import 4% of that back after the 7 months gets through, really we're just talking about 3 to 4% of the ground beef is going to be coming from Mexico. So I don't expect it to be something that pressures the market drastically, however you want to say it. They're expecting right around 80,000 head to come over per month over the next 7 months. So 80,000 head per month. And when you think about it, we have to think about this from a technical point of view and a fundamental point of view, right? From a technical point of view, the market's going to remain volatile. Why is that? Because traders don't make money unless the market is moving. Whether that's higher or whether that's lower, that's how the fact remains. And so we had our initial dump, right? And as you mentioned, Coulter, the market's already recovered from since then. But most likely when that first port in Douglas, Arizona opens on August 24th, what do you think the market's going to do? It's probably going to be lower. Okay, then we know that they're going to phase in the 2 New Mexico ports. There's the opportunity, there's the chance that those 2 reopenings pushes the market lower again. Not because we're necessarily seeing an overabundance of supply work its way into the marketplace that day, but just because it's an emotional reaction. When we talk about it from a fundamental standpoint, there's the case to be made that we need more beef. Absolutely. Everybody that goes and pays for beef right now as a consumer understands that. And really, when you take into the fact that we have increased drought right now, so many producers are continuing to liquidate because prices are high, but then also because they don't want to have to pay $300 plus per ton for hay right now. And we are having continued drought pressures, whether that be just because of the lack of moisture or fire. Really, this is kind of just an offsetting balance when you think about it in regards to supply and demand. We're going to import potentially potentially around 1 million head if we get back up to that 4% level, and which Mexico was doing before the border closed. And with how vast the liquidation continues to be, really it's kind of damage control in my mind.
Do you see a immediate impact? You talked about that third of it is fat cattle coming in, and you said it won't have too much of an effect on the market, but that's what we were kind of talking about earlier, is what is going to be that immediate effect, from the packers side of this? Are they, when they factor that into the cash market, are we going to see a stall for 2 weeks? Are we going to see a $10 to $15 drop? I know that's kind of a tough question to ask, but how fast does it drop, and how fast do we come back from this, do you think?
Oh, well, the golden rule is that the market loves to drop double compared to what it likes to gain, right? So if you have an instance, or you have an opportunity for the market to gain $2, it could easily lose 4. So I'm here to tell you that the downside is always overdone, and the upside is fought tooth and nail. So I can't tell you what the pressure is going to be. And like I said, the gentleman that I spoke with, I trust him. He's got good insight, and I believe him when he says 2/3 will be feeder cattle, 1/3 will be fat cattle. What we do know, and we can talk about this later, is that the cattle on feed reports have been very clear. We are seeing a theme across them. We are seeing an increase of the number of cattle on feed, and a decrease in the number of cattle marketed. And you might say, well, ShayLe, how in the world can we be sitting in a scenario in a marketplace in which we have more cattle on feed compared to a year ago, when our border has been close to Mexico, and when we have a historically low cow herd? That is because the days in which cattle are fed and fattened for 120 days are no more. COVID did away with that. We are now finishing cattle closer to 190 days on feed. And so when we're slowly building that inventory in the marketplace, we know that there's going to be an increase in supply, and that is going to pressure the market. Now, I don't know when that's necessarily going to happen, but it will pressure the market, undoubtedly.
Well, I'm glad you bring up that cattle on feed report, because obviously it came out the same day as the screwworm announcement, and not a lot of surprises, I don't think, in the numbers. But boy, like you talk about the inflated inventory we're seeing from feeding animals so much longer. I'm curious for your perspective, and this may take us down a rabbit hole, but how much is this beef on dairy thing affecting our inventories on feed? And have we replaced what traditionally would have been beef cattle on feed with now beef on dairy on feed, and sort of masking the shifts that we're seeing? What do you think?
Phenomenal question, and I can give it to you in an easy answer. 1 out of every 5 head of fat cattle processed is beef on dairy influenced. 20%, 1 in 5. That's a big number.
Right.
When you think of beef on dairy, you would maybe want to say 3 to 4, maybe 5%. No, it's 20%.
Wow.
And I'm here to tell you that, Coulter, in an off conversation, you had asked, well, ShayLe, kind of talking about the inventory report, do you ever think that the days in which we're at 30 million head of domestic beef cattle will ever come back? No, they won't. The cattle inventory report has been so clear in that whenever we have ebbs and flows in the marketplace, whenever we're, liquidating or beginning to build back, we never build back to the level in which the market was before. And that's going to be really pressured this next build back because of a couple of things. The competition for land and resources is astronomically high. We're going to have more imports again. We're going to get the Mexican cattle imported back, and then the beef on dairy influence. When you take all those things into consideration, it's an uphill battle for beef producers here domestically.
Well, when you bring up the beef on dairy, and we talk about adding days under the cattle on feed, of course, in the last report we saw, more cattle coming in on feed. The marketings continue to be lower and lower each and every single month. We're adding days to that. I think average we're about another 34 pounds on per head from where we were just last year. And when you talk to a lot of these guys that are in the beef on dairy, clearly they don't feed the same. You have to feed them out longer because of the carcass. At some point, is this going to get backed up? When we start to rebuild, when we do see a bigger calf crop coming in, and we're not going to get back to that 30, 31 million like you mentioned, but when we do, where does the pipeline get backed up, and what's going to be that immediate pressure? Do you think it's in the feedlots there when we have the beef on dairy, the longer days on feed, and lower marketings coming through?
That is the $1 million question. Where is the bubble going to pop at, right? In fact, I think it's going to be felt through a number of facets in the segment. Obviously, we're going to have a surplus of cattle on feed. And the nice thing about that is that through COVID, feedlots did realize and did come to understand that they can feed cattle for longer than they understand. So cattle have a little bit more of a shelf life than what they understood or initially. So luckily in marketings, hopefully they'll be able to be dynamic and, carry them over a couple weeks if they need to. But what's the trickle down effect of that? If there's built up supplies in the feedlot sector, what is that going to do to feeder cattle prices in the countryside? It's going to drop them because they don't need the inventory. And then if you take that one step further and you say, okay, well, you just brought up a beautiful point, Colder, that they're feeding these cattle to greater weights. And really, I think it's closer to pushing that 60 pounds over the cross of 2 years. Our cattle are now finishing out at 60 pounds heavier over the last 2 years compared to 2 years ago. So I ask you, here we are, we're kind of rubbing our hands and saying, hey, that cattle inventory report, it showed us that the total number of beef replacement heifers, it was up 3%. I'd ask you, what are you replacing those old cows that were in your herd, your nucleus? What are you replacing them with? What genetics are you seeking? What kind of cows are those? We just talked a minute ago that the resources required to run a profitable cow herd are becoming harder and harder to come by. It's a tough business, not impossible, a beautiful one to shake your bat at, but it's difficult. And so I would ask you, if we're feeding these steers to be 60 pounds heavier than what they were at kill weight 2 years ago, what do you think their sister mates are doing in your herd? Are they going to be 60 pounds heavier too? Well, if you're using the same genetics, they are. So I think that this is a beautiful time. There's so much in the market being shared on a daily basis that we as producers, we as analysts, it doesn't matter who you are in this marketplace, have to take it day by day. And while it's easy to run around like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, that doesn't help any of us. And so we need to be very finite and we need to be attuned to what the market's doing and ask, how does this change my business plan moving forward? What's my perspective? And how do I need to get my house in order? We like to think about these things that we can't necessarily touch. I have no control over what the U.S. Ag Secretary does. No matter how much I gripe and complain or how much I support, I really am a big advocate of her. I think she's done a phenomenal job. But regardless of what kind of day you're having, one of complaints, one of, of accolades, the only things that we can control is our own business and our own operation. And so now is the time in which we say, how am I going to get my own house in order? How am I going to get my own operation order? Because at some point we know this market's going to turn. I'm one that's always optimistic, always bullish. That's just my personality. As an analyst, I'm very conservative, but personally, I like to be optimistic. But I can tell you that right now, if there is any rollover money in your operation, it is in time to invest it into something that's going to help the business on the down years. It's so hard. It's so easy. The competition for our dollar is fierce. And it's so easy to justify that new side by side, right? We all like to go enjoy the outdoors and, fill the side by side up, go bump through cows, what have you. But I'm here to tell you, we need to be investing into things that make money. And whether it's new tubs, side by sides, DNA testing, what have you, the competition for your hard earned dollar is fierce and you need to protect it so carefully.
Yeah, because it's definitely going to turn, as we all know. It's history lesson 101. Well, I want to kind of shift this conversation a little bit as well, because we're looking forward into the future here. The heifer retention is the biggest question, I think, on a lot of producers' minds when they start looking at some of these reports. What is the magic number to you, ShayLe, of determining that we are seeing heifer retention? And of course, we see that cattle on feed report come out quarterly with how many heifers are on those on feed. What's that number you're looking for when you look at that to say, oh boy, we're starting to see some producers holding some of these heifers back?
The golden rule, Andy, for the cattle on feed report is 37%. And that is the threshold. That is the number that everybody monitors. When we see 37% of that steer and heifer breakdown, that starts to give us some guide as to what's happening in regards to heifers coming into the feedlot. But one thing that I think that we have to be so careful about moving forward is they're a liquid asset, right?
Yeah.
If we don't get any moisture this fall, this winter, what do you think individuals are going to do with them?
Preach it, girl.
They're gonna send them to town because hay prices are astronomically high. I know of some operators that didn't have any grass to kick out onto. They've been caking thus far through the summer. And I'm just here to tell you, if we don't get any rain or moisture this fall and winter, it's going to be quite bleak next year. And any of those females that were kept, some of those are going to be turned again. And now if we get moisture, that leads to a different conversation. You can either take that, and if there's, the anticipation that there's some money in the marketplace and people are really aggressively, hoping to build back and acquire some new females, hey, you can trade them. You earn a fine dime on them, or you can maybe just keep them in your own herd and grow that nucleus like I talked about earlier.
So as we think about the future, what do you make of this recent cattle inventory report? I feel like we can't spend too much time digging into the exact numbers. Are we 100,000 up, 200,000 down? But saying that we've got 3% more replacement heifers, but beef cow numbers are lower. It's the smallest calf crop on record. All these factors, they, to me, point towards, well, there's a path to growth here, but we're barely putting our toe on that path, it seems like.
And we could just end the conversation there. You said it beautiful. That really is what the market is saying, is that there's the hope, there's a desire, there's the anticipation that there will be a build back at some point in time, but who's going to do it?
Yeah.
The young producers can't. The capital required to get into this business is so astronomically high. And like I said, the older producer that is thinking about potentially selling their cow herd and retiring, now is a good time to do it. But the kind of golden ticket or the golden nugget here that I think that we found in the inventory report is we know that the market is going to always be volatile, right? That's never going to change. That's how the cattle market operates, because like I said earlier, traders make money when the market is moving. And so they love to see the market move. But adversely, on the other hand, we know if we would have had this conversation a year ago, exactly a year ago, I would have never ever said that the spring of 2026 would have done what it did. That would have been pretty bullish, pretty optimistic, right? But the cattle inventory report, yeah, it showed us that beef replacement heifers were up 3%, but it's going to be a while before their calves are worked their way into the marketplace. And so there's still a lot of opportunity for this market. And I think that it's important that we, again, put our houses in order, put our businesses in order, that if that market does stay optimistic, if it does stay bullish, that we capitalize on it, because we know the downturn will come eventually. I do not believe this is 2014, 2015, when it just crashes overnight, but we know that the downturn always comes faster than the upside is sought. So I think that the fine lining of that cattle inventory report, Coulter, was exactly that. There's the hope, there's the anticipation, there's the want to rebuild, but how to do it with a sound, profitable path forward remains in question, because it is not an easy business to navigate. And although there are ways to do it, producers are very skeptical, very cautious when they're planning to do so.
I think one of the things that stood out to me the most after the report was released, and reading your comments and other economists and analysts' comments on it, was now this is kind of the foundation. We saw that 37% number come through in the on feed, and then we saw the 3% heifers come back. That's the foundation. Now we wait for the next quarterly report to come through to see the change in that, to give us that actual trajectory if we are rebuilding or if we're still kind of staying stagnant. But when you take that into consideration, you take the big fall run that we always see in the marketplace, maybe we'll see some rain early fall, maybe we won't. There's just so many factors. What are you looking forward to, or what's going to catch your eye between now and then the January inventory report as to big factors that could make a big change here in what we saw this report compared to the January one coming up?
I think the biggest thing for me, I'll take this in a couple different points. I think one of the things that is hindering the ability to rebuild the cow herd more than anything is the knowingness of volatility in the marketplace. People are not confident that this market is going to stay strong long term. So depending on how this border reopening goes, how the midterm elections go, things of that nature, I think that just the sheer confidence in the producer that is potentially going to be the individual building back is going to be a big factor moving forward. And then just the golden rule of thumb in regards to whether or not the cow herd will be in a stage of liquidation or in a stage of growth is profitability in green grass. If profitability remains a factor in the marketplace, we will see growth in the cow herd, because it's advantageous to do so, right? It's easier to market large numbers and kind of offset some of the costs that way. And then second of all, we need moisture. And if we don't get moisture, there can't be much growth, because the hay supplies are short, the grasses are shot, and we need grass to feed the cows.
ShayLe, can you clear your schedule for the next 2 hours? Because the more we talk, the more questions I come up with here. But thinking more short run here. I mean, I know we've talked about the potential for growth is there. There is some underlying support to the market. But what do you think cow-calf producers need to be thinking as we move into the fall? I mean, we've talked about the bounce back we've seen in the futures. Pretty strong video sale here for Cattle Country Video this week. Are we going to see a more typical seasonal market with that downward pressure in the fall? Probably not going to see last year where it just went straight up day after day after day. But what should we be thinking about in the short run?
Again, going back to getting your house in order, that would be the point in which I would continue to stress. And so you're so right, Colter. I don't think that we're necessarily going to see the market high of 2026 being October like it was last year, right? But what I can say is that a lot of people don't realize that they don't need to have the pressure to diversify anymore or to go seek new revenue streams. They just need to control and maximize the revenue streams that they do have available to them. So, of course, we love talking about marketing feeder cattle, right? That's the grandiose effect of the cow-calf enterprise. But did you know that marketing cull cows can contribute anywhere to 10 to 30% of a cow-calf revenue? And so if you're not maximizing 30% of your annual revenue, what the hell are you doing? I mean, that's just the fact. And so I would ask you, I would say, I understand that so many cow-calf producers, they bring the cows in one day, peel the calves off, send them to town or get them in a feedlot, preg check the next day and then market them at the next sale. But is that the best decision? Because cull cow prices are typically the lowest in the fall and highest in the spring. And I know that this year might not be the opportunity to hold them over and sell them in the spring because hay prices are high. But should you kick a bull back in with them? Should you try turning them as a bred? Should you, maybe contact Transova and try to sell them personally? Should you take them to the sale barn? What should you do? And so I guess I would just, again, my biggest stress right now is get your house in order. Maximize the assets that you have. And so find the avenue, find the path forward in which they can make you the most money.
What do you think is the most exciting factor of this market as we are approaching the end of the video sale season? I know Colter just mentioned it, but seeing Cattle Country's video this week, I mean, some of those 1,000-pound steers selling for $340. It's just remarkable what producers are getting for a lot of those yearling steers. But what are you most excited for as we head into the fall run? There's a lot of volatility, but there still is a lot of excitement in this marketplace.
Out of all the questions you could have asked, I did not see that one coming. So I feel like I should have this grand answer of what I'm most excited for. But honestly, I think that, the weight of being a producer in this marketplace is one that's significant, right? The risks are there. The opportunity is there. And I think that's something that we need to keep in check. We are individuals that can sometimes get a little doom and gloom, right? The industry's hard, the market's tough, interest rates are, always something that we have to dance with. The drought's one thing, fires are the next. Where are the locusts? They're probably coming soon, not too far away, right? But at the end of the day, if there is a will, there's a way. And while it is tough to see our herd continue to be challenged and to know that there are producers that are going out of business because of just sheer circumstance, it may not be because they're bad producers and making poor decisions, but just simply because that's how the straw broke for them. There's opportunities for others as well. And this market allows for some profitability to truly be sought. And so I pray that you take that profitability and you do something with it. Don't spend it on dumb stuff. Go do something with it, invest it, let it multiply for you so that hopefully we can look at the next generation and say, hey, back then we had our house in order. We took care of business. We made money, make more money. That's what we did.
I think, ShayLe, you're going to have to come back on and be our first repeat guest on the Next Your Country podcast because there's just a million more questions to ask and everybody wants to know. We appreciate everything you do for the industry and especially for taking time to visit today.
Well, hey, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for just leading our industry and being the voice. Till next time.
Well, really appreciate ShayLe for joining us. Colton's right. We're going to have her on again because we've got about a dozen more questions to even start scratching the surface, but really do appreciate ShayLe. Do want to mention this podcast is sponsored by the Montana Farm Bureau Federation. Of course, that organization that's advocating on behalf of Montana producers in Helena and across the country. And of course, we're coming up on the County Farm Bureau meeting season where county organizations get together and set the policy of the grassroots organization. So if you're a Montana Farm Bureau member, member, check your mailbox for that invite to your county meeting. If you're not, talk to a Farm Bureau member. You might want to check out these meetings and really help develop that grassroots policy that shapes the future of agriculture. Well, guys, now as we move into our market discussion, I think ShayLe pretty well hit the cattle. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just let that be our cattle market update for the day. But I think we do have quite a bit to talk about in these grain markets, particularly with what we're seeing in wheat. We've been all over the place this summer, up and down. We're a little bit on the downtrend right now. If you think about where we were just 2 or 3 weeks ago, kind of the main thing being talked right now are peace talks or potential peace talks between the U.S. and Iran. So that's weighed a little bit on the grain market as it's brought crude oil prices down. The thing I'm wondering is we're pretty well past the planting season now in the southern hemisphere. The Strait of Hormuz has not really been officially opened. How did that affect planting decisions there to lose a little bit of access to nitrogen? Did they plant different things? Are the crops not going to be as big because they don't have the fertility? I don't know if you guys have talked to anyone in Australia or Argentina or anything like that, but I'm very curious how that's going to shake out for that crop.
Just watched Crocodile Dundee the other day, so I'm up to speed on my Australianness. No, I think you take that into consideration, and of course we've been talking about this for a while with that strait, the other strait, this strait, and that strait, all being closed and open at some point in time. The supply chain is getting backed up at certain points, right? And we're obviously seeing a big push domestically here, but what is that doing down the road? You take that on top with the major heat wave and drought conditions we're seeing across Europe and other parts of the country. I know they just came out and decreased their expectations for the European corn crop. I think it was down, their yield was down 6%, and they're calling for the lowest corn production since 2007. So we're already seeing a decrease on that end, but then you throw the supply factor into that, and we're going to see strong demand, I think, here for a lot of our domestic crops.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it earlier this year when the production, estimates came out, or what the producers of Australia were anticipating to produce. I think they're down 26% this year. So, I mean, you're absolutely right, Coulter, to keep a close eye on that, because it's something that I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see some of those figures come out once they get these planted. But 26% reduction in that country, and we're already seeing some reductions in the U.S. What are we the lowest level we are in U.S. history for wheat acres, I think?
Yeah, I think the lowest on record that we've got from USDA. But, continuing this episode of Strait of Who Cares? Who cares about this strait? My favorite strait this week is the Kerch Strait. Obviously, the strait that 30% of Russian wheat moves from Russia into the Black Sea. July was the lowest month in 9 years for Russian wheat exports because of the conflict with Ukraine, the damage to their export infrastructure, the vessels being hit by Ukraine, and, of course, Russia firing back. That takes a lot of wheat off the world market, at least in the short run, and I think could provide some more upside for our wheat. I think we would be much stronger this week were it not for the drop in crude oil prices.
Absolutely, 100%, and it's kind of the buy the rumor, sell the fact. I think we're going to see here before too long, because we're just fluctuating up 10 cents, down 12, up 15, down 20. Based off crude oil prices, peace talks. Here's one more attack. Here's peace talks for 2 more days. Then another attack. It's all noise at some point, but when this does settle down, that's going to be the outlier. That's going to be the actual driving factor. What are the supplies? What are their port of entries looking like? I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure damage, I'm sure, that has to be taking place in this war. So how long does it take for them to get back onto scale of what they have been before?
Well, and it's a short-term situation. Eventually, it'll get open. Eventually, that wheat will hit the market, but it does add risk premium and could create some opportunity. But moving us back closer to home, obviously, it's harvest season here. USDA said 29% of the Montana winter wheat is cut. I think we're higher than that. I've heard guys say they're over 2/3 of the way done with their winter wheat. Just kind of starting to get into the spring crops right now, and could have some pretty darn good ones. Heard some growers talking about the grain piles are starting to show up. So as we talk about markets, does that create some harvest pressure in the near term as we bring all that grain in, whether it's in the bin or bringing it straight from the field? So we could see some pressure on the market. You guys heard anything on how harvest is going? Colt and I, we were in the Golden Triangle. We saw some pretty nice looking spring crops.
Yep, and I actually just saw a video that Corey Falk posted here this week. I think it was either today or yesterday that he was out cutting some of the peas that he had planted and said he was pretty scared at first, but then those June showers kind of really turned it around. Of course, out there near Sunburst, they haven't seen rain in about a month. So again, he was kind of concerned, but said it was coming in about 35 bushels is what they were looking at. So he said he is better than his expectations for sure. So that's always exciting to hear those. Of course, Corey does a great job of just posting what's actually happening out in the field, and it's always fun to follow along.
He's one I want to have on this podcast. Corey and Whitney, two of my favorite people.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when I was in my hometown of Powell there as well, I could already see the pinto beans starting to turn a little bit too. So this hot weather certainly is increased or moved up the harvest dates. Park County Fair in Powell has always been kind of the determining factor of, are they cutting barley before Park County Fair? It's almost always after Park County Fair. This year, Park County Fair was a week ahead of what it normally was, just the way the calendar fell. And there was already barley trucks heading to the Breeze malt barley bins. So the harvest season is ahead of schedule across a lot of the area.
Well, speaking of barley, I think that's an area where we do have some challenges, particularly in the Yellowstone Valley, just the way the weather fell this year, too much moisture at the wrong time. I know we're seeing some issues with barley that's not going to make malt quality, which is really tough for growers that ran into it last year from wind and hail and other things that, again, cause them not to make malt. Thankfully, we do have some feed yards locally that can take some of that grain, so probably be the opportunity to feed some barley, at least in southern Montana this year. The last thing I wanted to touch on, guys, and we've kind of talked about this, that wheat has sort of built a bullish argument. We talk about the issues globally, that it might be profitable this year, whereas 4 months ago, we were probably not saying that as we saw the price of nitrogen escalating and as dry as it was. So what a welcome thing to be able to say that. But, you know, you talk about not wanting to farm for the government payment, Andy, and I know that is true, but there is going to be some money flowing in to producers this year. You know, in Congress, they're still throwing around this idea of up to $12 billion in aid for the farming sector. I mean, it's not passed, it's not done, so it's probably a late Q4, even into 2027 when that happens, but that's potentially coming down the pike. But much sooner, October 1, we'll finally see a PLC payment for growers for the first time in a number of years because of the increased reference prices last year and just where that market was. So growers are going to get something out of that. Hopefully that'll help make the difference with the challenges we've seen production-wise. Yields are down, but there is some money flowing in, so maybe a better year for farmers than we would have thought a few months ago.
And what a perfect time for that payment to come through, because that's just right after harvest. They're thinking about, all right, what are we looking at for next year? Kind of gathering thoughts from what they saw in the past. So to be able to see, I think this is a very timely, bullish path that we're seeing in the wheat market specifically right now. And it couldn't come at a better time because providing a little bit of optimism. And like you said, you throw that payment on top, it might just be enough to get guys through to next year.
It's been a long time since we said we were bullish wheat here.
Yeah.
Throw that term lightly.
It was back in 1992. No, you heard ShayLe say getting your house in order for these cattle guys. I think the grain producers, their house is certainly in order. They know exactly what they can, like you mentioned, Colton. They're looking at what they have and what they can spend. But the biggest thing, though, that I think about when we hear about these low commodity prices, it is a trickle down effect, unfortunately, to the ag businesses as well. We got to think about the dealerships, the equipment dealerships down the road. They're not seeing as many people coming in. You might even see it in your guys' auctions this year. That and I know you guys got a good farm auction coming up here soon, so I'm real curious to see how that's going to go for you guys, for those producers that are getting out. But these producers, they unfortunately don't have that extra dollar that they can go buy the stuff that really truly they need, and not necessarily a want, but it's a necessity. But certainly going to be interesting to see what plays out on that aspect.
No free ads around here. Send a bill to Rick Young and Sons Auctioneering.
Well, I was going to say,
what's that date again?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say this. July was actually the first month in the Purdue University and the CME Group's Ag Economy Barometer that they did show an uptick in optimism for producers. And they said that there was a fluctuation in one of the indexes to show that there's some investments being made. So that's going to wrap up another episode of Next Year Country. Of course, we'd like to thank ShayLe Stewart for coming on once again. I'm sure we'll have her back on here at some point. Just a wealth of knowledge, and thanks for everybody for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe our podcast. If you have a question, if you want us to talk about a topic, let us know. Feel free to comment on that. We'd love to see your feedback. As for now, though, that's going to be all for this episode. For Andy Schwab and Colter Brown, I'm Colton Young. We'll see you next time.